Hello everyone. Welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, we witnessed the madness of Diablo as he used Lord of Temptation to hypnotize himself, allowing the power of imaginary collapse to replenish his own energy and force Feldway into a desperate struggle. In this episode, we will witness Velzard's ultimate strike, Guy's Genesis-level weapon, World, and the complete downfall of Twilight Valentine. So, let's get started. Once Guy and Velzard got serious, the battlefield's danger level skyrocketed. Testarossa's cold gaze landed on Moss, silently confirming the security of the defensive barrier. Moss, filled with anxiety, stammered nervously. There was no way this barrier could withstand the coming storm. But if he said that out loud, he would be tortured by Testarossa to the point of wishing for death. His overwhelming survival instinct forced him to pull himself together, strengthening the defensive barrier with everything he had. However, Moss had already reached his absolute limit. At that moment, he unexpectedly received what seemed to be reliable support. Yes, it was none other than Primordial Blue Rain. With a confident smirk, Rain declared that she was doing her best and even went so far as to promise that if the barrier broke, she would start addressing Testarossa as Testarossa-sama from that day forward. In truth, Rain had snatched control of the barrier from Moss earlier, meaning she bore the greater responsibility for its integrity. Testarossa was left speechless by Rain's carefree attitude. Such titles held no meaning for her. With a calm demeanor, she simply reminded everyone to brace themselves for the impending impact. While Moss and Rain remained clueless, Misery immediately sensed something unusual and adjusted into a battle-ready stance. Salka, utterly confused about what was happening, simply followed orders, crouching like a turtle to brace for impact. This moment inadvertently revealed that Misery's combat instincts surpassed both Rain and Moss. A split second later, the defensive barrier trembled violently. This was Velzard's ultimate, all-consuming attack, Whiteout Absorb. Velzard possessed an intrinsic skill, cessation, an ability that could directly halt the motion of any substance, not merely reducing its kinetic energy to zero, but freezing it in its current state, making it completely immobile. When the ability was released, the substance would resume its original movement as if nothing had happened. Beyond that, she had the ultimate skill Lord of Patience, renowned for its absolute defensive capabilities, whose core principle was fixation, the ability to solidify and unify any substance into an indivisible whole. These two abilities, cessation and fixation, complemented each other perfectly. For example, freezing the moisture in the atmosphere to create an ice wall was effortless for Velzard. In theory, she could use any molecular structure to form a defensive barrier, though single-element barriers were stronger and more aesthetically pleasing, which was why she preferred adding this extra step. Furthermore, if she could halt the flow of energy itself, then nearly all attacks would be rendered ineffective. Unless an attack exceeded her near-infinite reservoir of magicules, it could never break through her defense. It was no exaggeration to call Velzard's defensive capabilities unrivaled. But what about offense? Previously, these two abilities were primarily used to restrict enemy movement and weaken their abilities, ensuring her own perfect defense. Even with just that, she was already an overwhelming force. However, Velzard had yet another ultimate skill, Lord of Envy, a skill dedicated to weakening opponents by reducing their power proportionally to their strength. Unsurprisingly, this ability synergized flawlessly with her other skills. Combined with Velzard's nearly limitless magicule reserve, she could completely shield herself behind an impenetrable defense while simultaneously draining her opponent's power, ensuring a battlefield where victory was absolute. This was Velzard's ultimate strategy, the law of inevitable victory. Truthfully, there were almost no enemies in existence that could force Velzard to utilize this strategy to its full extent. One could say this battle tactic had been designed specifically for Guy. Of course, even with a perfect defense, she still needed an equally unstoppable attack. And so, Velzard unleashed her trump card, combining Cessation Lost with Lord of Patience's power of solidification, then integrating Lord of Envy's authority Absorb. she unleashed her most devastating attack, Whiteout Absorb. The white shockwave surged toward the defensive barrier Moss had been maintaining with all his strength, but in truth, this was merely the attack's residual impact. In an instant, the overwhelming force shattered the barrier like fragile glass. At that critical moment, Rain still had the presence of mind to uphold her promise, switching to calling Testarossa-sama as she had vowed. Testarossa, however, was thoroughly fed up with Rain's frivolous attitude, someone who only knew how to talk big but was utterly unreliable when it mattered. She secretly swore to make Rain pay for her carelessness. But for now, Testarossa swiftly responded to the escalating situation. However, their survival wasn't purely by their own means. Their unexpected salvation came from an uninvited guest, Gabiru, who had arrived on orders to provide backup. Gabiru had barely arrived on the battlefield when his instincts immediately detected overwhelming danger, prompting him to unleash his most powerful authority under Ultimate Gift Lord of Psychology, Destiny Alteration. A highly specialized ability that could only be activated once per day, Destiny Alteration carried numerous limitations, but when successfully executed, it rewrote fate itself, erasing any tragedy as if it had never occurred. Thanks to Gabiru's sharp judgment, the catastrophic consequences of the defensive barrier's destruction were completely nullified. Of course, he wasn't alone. Alongside him was the ever-reliable Geld, who had been sent by Benimaru to provide reinforcements. Arriving just in time, Geld hastily deployed his own barrier beneath Moss's failing one, buying a few precious seconds. Initially, it seemed his intervention would be too late, but Gabiru's destiny alternation changed everything. With Rain's assistance, Gabiru's destiny alteration, and Geld's emergency barrier, Moss managed to re-establish the defense just in time. It was a miraculous sequence of events. Had any single element deviated, they all would have met their doom. Rain, miraculously unscathed, smugly claimed full credit for their survival, boasting about their miraculous teamwork. Naturally, everyone ignored her, even when she dramatically pretended to sob in disappointment at their indifference. Meanwhile, Gabiru hurriedly inquired about his sister Sauka's condition, though Sauka easily saw through his real concern, Sophia, who had been frozen into an ice sculpture. With a knowing smirk, Sauka reassured him that, ironically, being encased in Velzard's ice had actually protected Sophia. Though it seemed contradictory, Velzard's ice had, in fact, preserved the entire battlefield. Relieved, Gabiru accepted this explanation, satisfied that Sophia would be safe. However, he remained oblivious to just how powerful destiny alteration truly was. While it could only be activated under strict conditions, its influence was far more extensive than anyone realized. Yes, the true extent of this miracle was yet to be revealed. We will explore this further in due time. Now, shifting our perspective to Guy, his instincts had already told him Velzard was preparing to unleash her trump card. The two had been locked in a prolonged duel of evenly matched attacks and defenses, testing each other's limits. Now, with no reason left to hold back, the decisive moment had arrived. As expected, with a voice as captivating as a celestial melody, Velzard invoked her most powerful strike, Whiteout Absorb, its devastating force tearing straight through Guy's body. But that was all. In his grasp, a long, slender sword gleamed as it sliced cleanly through the freezing energy of Whiteout Absorb. Guy smirked and commended Velzard, acknowledging her prowess for forcing him to finally draw his blade. This was none other than World, one of the 7 Genesis-level weapons. Unlike Azura, which had been passed down to Malim, Guy's World was in pristine condition, its blade shimmering with a dazzling rainbow luster and intricate patterns that resembled pulsating veins. The sword thrummed in his grasp, a perfect extension of his own being. Like all Genesis-level weapons, World, similar to its mythical-level counterparts, bestowed immense power upon its wielder. While its ultimate potential was still determined by its master's strength, Genesis-level weapons contained existence points in the tens of millions. In the beginning, Guy had been unable to fully utilize its capabilities, but with time and experience, he had mastered its power. From the moment he unsheathed World, his existence points matched Velzard's, erasing any advantage she once held. With even her overwhelming power neutralized, Velzard had no path to victory. Guy, ever the universal and unparalleled force, owed his supremacy to his ultimate skill, Lord of Pride. Though his body bore countless wounds from whiteout absorb, and the freezing effects had temporarily sealed his Godspeed regeneration, none of this was a significant problem. At the crucial moment, Guy replicated Rimura's ultimate skill, Lord of Gluttony, devouring not only the ice affliction but also his injured flesh. In mere seconds, his body fully regenerated. Through Velzard's most devastating attack, Guy had even managed to analyze the core mechanics behind Lord of Patience and Lord of Envy. While cessation, her intrinsic skill, remained troublesome, Guy was now confident in his ability to counter it. Having fully grasped his impending victory, he relished the sensation of Sword World fusing seamlessly with his very essence, flashing a sly grin at Velzard. This was his provocation. Velzard's trump card had failed spectacularly. As we previously discussed, Guy had drawn out this battle specifically to uncover Velzard's hidden skills and their precise mechanisms. Once her hand had been fully revealed and Guy had successfully analyzed her skills, he had no trouble formulating a response. The moment Whiteout Absorb failed to deal a fatal blow, the match was effectively decided. This was an undeniable fact, and Velzard knew it well. She simply refused to accept it. Velzard outright denied her defeat, but Guy was not fooled by her bravado. With a taunting smirk, he flatly declared that she was merely pretending to be controlled. Though their exchange was laced with sharp mockery, an unspoken camaraderie flickered between them. In this tense moment, Velzard's internal conflict was laid bare. She was wavering. Guy remained as arrogant as ever, yet when Velzard faced him, she felt an unfamiliar warmth stir within her cold, unyielding heart. However, she knew this feeling had no place within her. A force far greater than her own will refuse to let her succumb to it. It was Feldway's lingering curse, and it echoed within Velzard's mind. Ever the cunning and suspicious strategist, Feldway had controlled Velzard through ultimate dominion but remained skeptical of the effectiveness of this control, believing that Velzard, swayed by genuine emotions, might ultimately defect to Guy's side. Anticipating such an outcome, he devised a countermeasure, modifying the control circuit to surveil her actions and implementing Regalia Dominion, a timed mechanism designed as a failsafe. Unlike a permanent constraint, this mechanism exerted only a fleeting moment of influence, similar to a timed trigger. However, even for someone as powerful as Feldway, fully controlling Velzard while simultaneously suppressing Meline was a ludicrous notion. But Feldway had prepared a secondary failsafe, Twilight Valentine, the entity residing within Velzard's body. Having negotiated in secret, Feldway had forged a contract with Twilight, lying in wait for the perfect opportunity to strike. That moment had arrived. Twilight awakened once more, but this time, it wasn't the creation of a pseudo-dragon body, a mere copy. This was a complete usurpation of a true dragon. Velzard's body glowed faintly before undergoing a drastic transformation, her form shifting into a more masculine physique. The silhouette was unmistakable. This was Twilight Valentine. Twilight let out an exhilarated cry, exclaiming that he had been careless before, but now, victory was his. Guy's rage exploded. Twilight had dared to lay a hand on Velzard, someone he held dear beyond words. The fury surging through him threatened to consume his very being. At that same moment, the residual will of Feldway, nothing more than a fragment of his essence, issued a direct command to Twilight: eliminate Guy immediately. Twilight prepared to comply, but just as he was about to respond, his thoughts abruptly halted. A sudden anomaly disrupted his focus. An ominous void enveloping Guy and Velzard split open, forming a narrow passage. Then, a bullet shot through that passage, a bullet carrying the power to annihilate all. It was Judgment Bullet, Carrera's most devastating attack. This was undoubtedly the joint masterpiece of Testarossa and Carrera. Even so, Testarossa couldn't help but remark that Carrera might have gone a bit overboard. Carrera simply scoffed, arguing that even at its strongest, Judgment Bullet wasn't capable of killing a true dragon, so there was no real harm done. Testarossa begrudgingly accepted the logic, though the visible aftermath was undeniable. A gaping hole had been blasted through Velzard's chest. So why had Carrera suddenly appeared on the battlefield? This, too, was a miracle wrought by Gabiru. His goal had not only been to protect those within the defensive barrier but also to rescue his frozen comrades, especially Sophia, who had just become his beloved. However, the first one to be saved was Carrera, simply because she had been the closest to the barrier. This was no accident. Testarossa had been steadily directing Moss to maneuver the barrier toward Carrera, ensuring she would be revived first. Upon awakening, Carrera, grumpy and temperamental like a raging storm, muttered about sensing an unpleasant presence. Still half-conscious, she lashed out with the unrestrained force of her judgment bullet, an attack she could only use once per day. The abruptness of her strike shocked everyone, but Testarossa, ever the tactician, swiftly grasped the situation. She, too, had detected the repulsive aura emanating from Velzard, the unmistakable presence of Twilight Valentine, whom they had just defeated. Recognizing the threat, Testarossa manipulated the void itself, opening a direct channel for Carrera's bullet to strike true. While Judgment Bullet was not powerful enough to kill Velzard outright, it had accomplished something just as crucial. It shattered Feldway's lingering curse, expelling his residual will completely. Simultaneously, Twilight Valentine, existing in Manus form within Velzard, was caught in the blast. Under normal circumstances, a Manus resided within its host soul, existing as an inseparable entity. Targeting such an existence was virtually impossible. No one, not even the strongest of beings, could precisely pinpoint and attack a Manus. However, Twilight and Velzard's circumstances were highly unusual. They had only been collaborators, not a true unified entity. Velzard was merely a vessel, allowing Twilight the ability to create pseudo-dragon bodies. This fundamental separateness now proved to be Twilight's downfall. Confusion gripped him. This was no ordinary weakness. It wasn't even supposed to be a vulnerability. In fact, it should have been an advantage. Yet reality had played a cruel trick, and a once impossible event had unfolded before his eyes. A moment later, Twilight's consciousness was swallowed by darkness. Even the core of Twilight Valentine, which had been sheltered within Velzard's body, was utterly obliterated. Following in Jahil's footsteps, Twilight had now been erased from existence. Of course, the seamless success of this operation could not be attributed purely to luck. There was reason to believe that Gabiru's destiny alteration had subtly influenced the outcome. Testarossa, ever the calculating mind, found herself re-evaluating Gabiru with newfound respect. However, things did not go as smoothly as expected. Just as Twilight had seized control of Velzard's body, he was forced to relinquish it. As a result, Velzard reverted to her original form, but at the cost of her sanity. Yes, Stampede mode Velzard had emerged. Caught in the collateral chaos, Guy couldn't help but grumble at Carrera, lamenting her recklessness and complete disregard for consequences. While Velzard's berserk state wasn't as apocalyptic as Milim's, it still posed an immense threat to the world. The ice and snow that had blanketed the battlefield began melting at an alarming rate, and Velzard's absolute defense, the protective force that had shielded the world, was beginning to dissipate. Realizing the severity of the situation, Guy prepared to respond with full force. Carrera, however, remained unapologetic, nonchalantly remarking that since Velzard had frozen her solid, returning the favor with a bullet seemed entirely justified. It was an argument that perfectly encapsulated Carrera's personality. Guy sighed, muttering complaints about Carrera, while Carrera grumbled in return, but there was no time for bickering. The immediate priority was handling Velzard. Testarossa swiftly adjusted her approach, recognizing that Velzard's loss of control was likely linked to Twilight's unexpected downfall, most likely the result of Judgment Bullet's effects. Changing tactics, she channeled Void to neutralize Velzard's incoming magic attacks while simultaneously attempting to seal away the remnants of the icy domain. For the comrades who had only just begun to regain consciousness and were still evacuating, maintaining visibility was paramount. Testarossa's icy voice cut through the turmoil as she reminded Carrera and Rain not to slack off. Carrera, ever enthusiastic, proclaimed that she would help out that pathetic Guy, while Rain, clearly reluctant, begrudgingly agreed to showcase her true power. Guy sighed once again, wondering whether there was even a single normal primordial demon. The answer was yes, of course. Testarossa focused her energy on controlling the void, executing precise defensive counterattacks, while Misery had already determined her role, to maintain the barrier. Geld, though reliable, was incapable of expanding a barrier large enough to encompass the entire battlefield. Meanwhile, Moss's barrier, now strained due to Rain's departure, required additional support. The burden on Misery had increased significantly, yet thanks to Geld's presence, the barrier's integrity remained intact. With Velzard's ice vanishing, the protective cocoon it had provided was gone. Those exposed beyond the barrier now faced the very real threat of death. Esprit and other warriors who had been released from their icy confinement quickly joined in to reinforce the barrier. Others who had awakened either retreated from the battlefield or took on the role of guiding civilians to safety. Amidst this white expanse, visibility was gradually being restored. However, in many instances, people still relied on their senses, smell, hearing, vibrations in the air, to perceive their surroundings. For those still struggling to comprehend the chaos unfolding around them, the cacophony of roaring energy, shockwaves, and earth-shaking tremors painted the scene as nothing short of hell itself. Many displayed expressions of despair, some even resigning themselves to an eternal slumber. The strong could only attempt to reassure and guide them, and fortunately, most of those present were seasoned warriors, ensuring that panic did not spiral out of control. Some chose not to retreat but instead remained to witness the spectacle in the skies above. Gabwa, Phobio, and others were utterly stunned by what they saw. If someone had claimed that the world was on the verge of destruction, they would not have doubted it. Carrion, however, maintained an optimistic outlook, firmly believing that Guy would find a way to turn the tide. Frey, ever pragmatic, reminded him that regardless of their inability to contribute directly to maintaining the barrier, they needed to reorganize their forces and stabilize morale through thought communication. The two immediately set to work. Guy, meanwhile, couldn't help but wear a wry smile. He could perceive everything unfolding on the battlefield, not that he minded Carrion's unwavering trust, but rather because he understood that the situation was far from ideal. Velzard's rampage was only escalating, showing no signs of subsiding. While Guy was confident that he wouldn't lose to her, defeating her without causing irreversible destruction was another matter entirely. Even more so, the option of killing Velzard did not exist in his mind. As the instability around them grew increasingly violent, Carrera and Rain took their positions beside Guy, awaiting orders. Guy fell into deep thought. Faced with an unprecedented crisis, he knew that only an unprecedented strategy would suffice. Alright, that's all for this video. Just how many ultimate skills has Guy copied? The number is undoubtedly far greater than the 3 we've seen so far, though further details will have to wait for the author's official clarification. While this episode primarily focused on the battle between Guy and Velzard, it was Testarossa and Carrera who truly stole the spotlight. Testarossa displayed an exceptional ability to respond to crises, seamlessly coordinating with both Guy and Carrera, solidifying her dominance as the White Queen. Carrera's combat instincts and decisive actions also left a lasting impression. Thanks to her, Twilight never even had a proper chance to act. Just like Jahil before him, another calamity that had once brought nothing but destruction to the world had finally been erased forever. In our next episode, Rimuru will finally return to the battlefield, just in time to neutralize Malim's Drago Nova. The next chapter will be just as thrilling. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.